I was curled up on our couch, waiting for Paul to come home from another late work meeting. My phone sat next to me, and I kept glancing at it, hoping for a text saying he was on his way. Instead, the message that popped up made my blood freeze. Honestly, you're draining. Give me a break. I stared at the words on my screen, reading them over and over. My hands started shaking. After 2 years together, after moving in with him, after planning our future together, this was what he really thought of me? I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The man I loved, the person I trusted with my heart, had just called me a burden. The worst part? He sent it so casually, like he was ordering coffee or complaining about traffic. My mind raced with questions. Was I really that needy? Had I been asking for too much attention? Was loving him too much somehow wrong? I sat there in our shared living room, surrounded by photos of our happy moments, feeling completely alone. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. But then my phone buzzed again. What I saw next changed everything. Before I could even process the first message, another text appeared below it. Also, don't wait up tonight. I'm with someone who actually excites me. My heart stopped completely. I read it again, then again, praying I was misunderstanding. But there was no other way to interpret those words. He wasn't just calling me draining. He was admitting he was cheating on me. Right now. While I sat at home like an idiot, worried about him working late, the room started spinning. 2 years of my life. 2 years of believing his lies about overtime and business dinners and weekend conferences. 2 years of trusting him completely while he was out there with other women. I dropped my phone on the couch and ran to the bathroom. I barely made it before throwing up. When I looked in the mirror afterward, my face was ghost white, my eyes already red and swollen. The woman staring back at me looked broken. But underneath that pain, something else was stirring. Something that felt like fire building in my chest. He thought I was draining? He thought some other woman was more exciting than me? Fine. Let's see how exciting things could get. I walked back to the living room on shaking legs and picked up my phone. The messages were still there, glowing on the screen like evidence of a crime. My first instinct was to call him, to scream, to cry, to demand answers, to beg him to come home and explain how this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the casual cruelty in his words. Maybe it was the realization that this probably wasn't the first time. Maybe it was just pure shock. Instead of calling, I took screenshots. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone, but I managed to capture both messages clearly. Then I sat back down on the couch and cried. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the ugly, body-shaking sobs of someone whose entire world just collapsed. I cried for the fool I'd been, for the nights I'd worried about him, for the future I'd imagined that was never real, for the woman he was probably laughing about with someone else right now. But even through the tears, that fire in my chest kept growing. Paul had made a mistake tonight. A big one. He'd show me exactly who he really was. Now I needed to decide who I was going to be. I must have fallen asleep on the couch because the sound of keys in the door jolted me awake. It was almost 3 a.m. Paul walked in like nothing had happened. He tossed his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and headed toward the bedroom without even looking at me. How was work? I asked quietly. He paused and turned around, finally noticing I was there. Fine. Long meeting ran late. The lie rolled off his tongue, so easily it made me sick. I held up my phone, showing him the messages on the screen. Want to try that again? For just a second, I saw panic flash across his face. But then his expression hardened into something cold and cruel. Well, he said with a shrug, maybe now you'll learn not to be so needy. Not an apology. Not shame or regret. Just more cruelty, served up with a smirk. He looked at me like I was pathetic for being hurt. Like I was the problem for caring that my boyfriend was cheating on me. That's when I knew for certain that the Paul the first thought I loved had never existed. This cold, sneering stranger was who he'd been all along. Go sleep on the couch, he added, heading toward our bedroom. I need space to think. I watched him disappear into what used to be our room, and I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh. But underneath it, something else was growing. Something that felt like steel forming in my spine. Paul thought I was draining? He thought I was needy and pathetic? He thought he could treat me like garbage and I'd just take it? He was about to learn how wrong he was. I wasn't going to beg him to stay. I wasn't going to cry and plead for another chance. I wasn't going to compete with whatever exciting woman he thought was better than me. Instead, I was going to show him exactly what draining looked like. I was going to drain him of his reputation, his comfort, his ability to lie to everyone around him. As the sun started to rise, I began to plan. Paul had made one crucial mistake when he sent those messages. He'd given me proof of exactly who he was. Now I just needed to decide what to do with it. The old me would have confronted him, given him a chance to explain, maybe even forgiven him if he seemed sorry enough. But the old me was gone, destroyed by 2 text messages and a smirk. The new me was going to be much more interesting than he'd ever imagined. The next morning, Paul acted like nothing had happened. He made coffee, showered, and got ready for work with the same routine he'd followed for months. Just before he left, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "Sorry, babe. Don't take it so seriously. You know I didn't mean it." I stared at the message in disbelief. This was his idea of an apology? No acknowledgement of the cheating. No real remorse. Just a casual dismissal of my feelings. "Got your text," I said when he walked back into the kitchen. He shrugged. "Good. So we're cool?" The audacity was breathtaking. He genuinely thought he could cheat on me, call me draining, and then smooth it over with a half-hearted text that didn't even apologize for the right things. "Sure," I said with a smile. "We're cool." He looked relieved and gave me a quick kiss on the forehead before heading out the door. The kiss felt like a brand, marking me as his fool. But Paul had misunderstood my smile. I wasn't forgiving him. I was planning his downfall. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I got to work. If he wanted to play games, I'd show him how the game was really played. And unlike him, I was going to win. I spent the morning going through everything with fresh eyes. Our shared laptop, his social media accounts that he'd never bothered to log out of, even his old phone that he kept in the bedroom drawer. What I found made me sick to my stomach, but it also made me angrier than I'd ever been in my life. This wasn't new behavior. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. Paul had been living a double life for months, maybe longer. I found messages to at least 3 different women. Flirty texts, photos, plans to meet up while I thought he was working. One conversation went back almost 6 months. I screenshot everything. Every message, every photo, every lie he told me that I could now prove was false. The most disgusting part? He'd been complaining about me to these women, calling me clingy, boring, too emotional. He'd been using me as a sob story to get sympathy from other women while he cheated on me. One message particularly stood out. He'd told a woman named Jessica that he was stuck with a girlfriend who doesn't understand him, but that he was working on getting out of the situation. I was the situation. 2 years of love, and I was just a problem he was trying to solve. By the time I finished going through everything, I had enough evidence to destroy him completely. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would help me think clearly. So I called my best friend Mia. "You need to see something," I said when she answered. "Can you come over?" 20 minutes later, she was sitting on my couch, scrolling through screenshot after screenshot on my phone. Her face went from confusion to shock to pure rage. "Oh my God," she whispered, looking at a particularly graphic message. "How long has this been going on?" "Months. Maybe longer." My voice sounded hollow even to me. Mia set down my phone and grabbed my hands. "You have gold here," she said fiercely. "Absolute gold. Don't waste it on a private confrontation where he can twist everything around and make you look crazy." She was right. Paul was smooth, charming, good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe. If I confronted him privately, he'd find a way to turn it back on me. "What are you thinking?" I asked. Mia's eyes gleamed with something that looked like justice. I'm thinking Paul likes to put on a show about what a great boyfriend he is. Maybe it's time everyone saw the real performance. You mean make it public? I mean wait for the perfect moment. When you have an audience that matters to him. When the exposure will hit where it hurts most. We spent the next hour planning. By the time Mia left, I knew exactly what I was going to do. If you're hooked on this story of sweet revenge, make sure to subscribe for more incredible tales like this one. Over the next few days, I dove deeper into Paul's secret life while pretending everything was normal at home. I found his hidden social media accounts, the ones he thought I didn't know about. The photos made my stomach turn. Different girls in different restaurants, all within the past few months. Same smile, same charm, same lies he'd probably told each of them about how special they were. One girl, Amanda, seemed to be his current favorite. Her photos were recent, and their message thread showed they'd been together the night he sent me those cruel texts. She had no idea he had a live-in girlfriend. In her mind, she was dating an available, successful man who took her to nice places and sent her sweet messages. Another girl, Rachel, thought she was his girlfriend. Their messages showed a 6-week relationship that overlapped completely with his relationship with me. I realized Paul wasn't just cheating. He was living multiple lives simultaneously, compartmentalizing each woman so carefully that none of us knew about the others. The level of deception was staggering. This wasn't a man who made a mistake or fell into temptation. This was a man who systematically lied to multiple women, playing with all of our hearts like it was a game. But games have winners and losers. Paul was about to find out which one he was. That weekend, I decided to test him. I suggested we go to dinner at a nice restaurant somewhere we could talk. At the restaurant, I watched him across the table and marveled at how good he was at pretending. He smiled, held my hand, asked about my day like he was a loving boyfriend instead of a serial cheater. "You've been working so much lately," I said casually. "All those late nights must be exhausting." "Oh, you know how it is," he replied smoothly. "Big projects, demanding clients. Sometimes I don't have a choice." I nodded sympathetically while thinking about the photos of him with Amanda from just 2 nights ago. "Of course. I just worry about you sometimes." He squeezed my hand. "That's sweet, but you don't need to worry. I can handle it." When he excused himself to go to the bathroom, I noticed something that made my blood boil. There was lipstick on his shirt collar. Fresh lipstick, in a shade I never wore. He'd been with someone else before coming to dinner with me. Probably Amanda. Maybe he told her he had to work late tonight. When he came back to the table, I smiled and continued our conversation like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was taking notes. Every lie, every casual deception, every moment he looked me in the eye and pretended to be someone he wasn't. Paul was digging his own grave, one lie at a time. The next week, I made a mistake. I asked Paul about a charge I'd seen on our shared credit card statement, an expensive dinner at a restaurant we'd never been to together. His entire demeanor changed instantly. The charming facade dropped, replaced by cold irritation. "Seriously?" he snapped. "You're going through my credit card charges now?" "This is exactly what I'm talking about." "I'm not going through anything," I said calmly. "It's a shared account. I saw the charge when I was paying bills." "Right, and instead of trusting me, you immediately assume something suspicious is going on. Do you hear yourself? Do you realize how paranoid and draining this behavior is?" The word draining hit me like a slap. He was using my hurt against me, turning my reasonable questions into evidence of my supposed flaws. "I'm not being paranoid," I said. "I just asked about a charge. And I'm telling you it was a business dinner. But apparently, my word isn't good enough for you anymore. You need to investigate everything I do like I'm some kind of criminal." He was good at this, I realized. At turning the tables, making me feel guilty for asking questions about his behavior. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. While he talked, I secretly recorded the conversation on my phone. Every word of his gaslighting, preserved forever. Paul thought he was winning this argument. He had no idea he was just providing more evidence for his own destruction. A few days later, Paul surprised me with news that made my heart race with possibility. My mom wants us to come to dinner this weekend, he said over breakfast. She's been asking about you, and I think it's time for a proper visit. This was perfect. Better than perfect. Paul's mother, Patricia, had always been polite to me but distant. She treated me like a temporary inconvenience in her precious son's life, someone who would eventually be replaced by someone more worthy of the family name. She had no idea her golden boy was a serial cheater who treated women like disposable entertainment. That sounds wonderful, I said with genuine enthusiasm. Should I bring anything? Just yourself, Paul replied, kissing my forehead. I want to show her what a perfect girlfriend I have. Perfect girlfriend. The irony was almost funny. I spent the rest of the week thinking about that dinner. Paul wanted to show me off to his mother, to present our relationship as something beautiful and stable. What he didn't realize was that he'd just given me the perfect audience for the truth. His mother, his family, everyone who thought Paul was such a catch, they were all about to learn what kind of man he really was. The dinner was going to be much more interesting than any of them expected. Saturday evening arrived, and we drove to Paul's childhood home. Patricia had prepared an elaborate dinner, complete with the good china and candles. She greeted Paul with a huge hug and air-kissed me on both cheeks with the kind of fake warmth that wealthy people perfect. Paul tells me you've been together for 2 years now, she said as we sat down to dinner. How lovely. The way she said lovely made it clear she thought it was anything but. Throughout dinner, Patricia gushed over Paul's accomplishments, his job, his intelligence, his charm. She talked about what a devoted son he was, how proud she was of the man he'd become. She barely looked at me except to ask polite but dismissive questions about my much less impressive job and my modest background. Paul's always been selective about the people he spends time with, she said at one point. He has such high standards. The message was clear. I didn't meet those standards, and she was wondering why her son was wasting his time with me. I smiled and nodded and played the role of the grateful girlfriend who was honored to be included in their perfect family dinner. But inside, I was taking careful notes about Patricia's obvious favoritism and her complete faith in her son's character. She was about to learn some very interesting things about her perfect boy. That night, lying in bed next to Paul, I stared at the ceiling and felt my resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. Patricia's dinner had shown me exactly what I was dealing with. Paul wasn't just a cheater. He was a golden child who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. His mother clearly thought he could do no wrong, and she treated me like a temporary inconvenience in his charmed life. They both needed a reality check. I got up quietly and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me had changed over the past few weeks. My eyes looked harder, more determined. My jaw was set in a way that meant business. You are not the weak one here, I whispered to my reflection. You're the storm that's coming. Paul thought he could manipulate me, lie to me, cheat on me, and I'd just take it because I loved him. His mother thought I was beneath her son's notice. They were both wrong. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, planning my strategy, preparing for war. Paul had been playing checkers while I was playing chess. The time for tears and self-doubt was over. Now it was time for justice. And I was going to deliver it in a way that neither Paul nor his precious mother would ever forget. Tomorrow, I would start putting the final pieces in place. The next morning, while Paul was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I went through his wallet. What I found there was almost worse than the cheating. Credit card statements showed expensive charges I'd never heard him mention. Hotel rooms, jewelry purchases, fancy dinners, all on dates when he told me he was working late or out with his male friends. He'd been financing his double life with money from our shared accounts. Money I'd contributed to from my paychecks, thinking we were building a future together. One receipt particularly caught my attention. A jewelry store purchase from last week for $300. I'd never received any jewelry from Paul. Ever. My hands shook as I photographed everything. Receipt after receipt of evidence that Paul had been spending our money on other women while making me feel guilty for asking for basic attention and honesty. The financial betrayal somehow hurt even more than the emotional cheating. This wasn't just about his wandering heart. He'd been stealing from our future to fund his games. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and returned to bed before Paul finished his shower. When he came out, towel around his waist, smiling at me like the loving boyfriend he pretended to be, I smiled back. But inside, I was calculating exactly how much money he'd stolen from us and planning how to make him pay for every penny. Later that week, Paul dropped a piece of news that made my heart race with anticipation. I'm planning a big party, FO. Actually, he said, his eyes lighting up, you're great at organizing things. Would you mind taking care of the planning? I'll give you my guest list and you can handle the rest. I couldn't believe my luck. Paul was literally asking me to plan the event that would become the stage for his public humiliation. I'd love to, I said with genuine enthusiasm. Over the next few days, Paul gave me a list of over 50 people he wanted to invite. His mother, his siblings, his coworkers, his boss, his college friends, neighbors, basically everyone whose opinion mattered to him. As I sent out invitations and planned menu details, I was also planning something else entirely. Paul wanted a memorable 30th birthday party. He wanted to celebrate surrounded by everyone important to him. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. A party he'd never forget, surrounded by everyone whose respect he was about to lose forever. The guest list he'd given me wasn't just a party invitation list. It was a perfect audience for the truth. For the next 3 weeks, I became the perfect girlfriend. I helped Paul plan every detail of his party, cooked his favorite meals, and acted sweeter than I'd been in months. Paul was thrilled with my sudden return to the loving, attentive girlfriend he remembered from our early days together. See, he said one evening as I massaged his shoulders after a long day. This is the version of you I fell in love with. Supportive, caring, not constantly questioning everything I do. I smiled and continued the massage while imagining exactly how his face would look when he realized what was really happening. During those weeks, Paul's cheating actually escalated. With me being so supportive, he felt more comfortable taking risks. He stayed out later, made more excuses, and became sloppier about covering his tracks. I documented everything. More photos, more messages, more evidence of his ongoing betrayals with multiple women. The closer we got to his birthday party, the more evidence I collected and the sweeter I became. Paul thought he'd successfully trained me back into submission. He thought he was winning. Meanwhile, I was preparing a presentation that would rival any business proposal he'd ever seen. Professional, thorough, and devastating. Paul had no idea what was coming for him, but everyone who mattered to him was about to find out who he really was. The night of Paul's 30th birthday party arrived, and our house was transformed. I'd hired caterers, decorated with elegant themes, and created the perfect atmosphere for celebration. Guests started arriving at 7 p.m. Paul's mother came first, dressed to impress, and clearly proud of her son's success. His coworkers followed, then college friends, then neighbors, and extended family. By 8 p.m., the house was full of laughter, music, and conversation. Paul moved through the crowd like a king holding court, accepting congratulations and soaking up the attention. I played the perfect hostess, making sure everyone had drinks and food, charming Paul's guests with small talk and gracious hospitality. You've outdone yourself, Paul's boss told me. This is a fantastic party. Paul deserves the best, I replied with a smile. He's such a special man. Paul beamed when he overheard this exchange. He wrapped his arm around my waist and kissed my cheek in front of everyone. Isn't she amazing? He announced to the nearby group. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. Several people murmured agreement and raised their glasses in our direction. What they didn't know is that I'd spent the afternoon setting up a projector and screen in the living room, telling everyone it was for a surprise slideshow of Paul's life. They had no idea what kind of slideshow they were about to see. At 9 p.m., Paul called for everyone's attention. The crowd gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, ready for whatever surprise I had planned. Before we continue celebrating, Paul announced, my amazing girlfriend has prepared something special for everyone to see. He handed me the microphone with a proud smile, clearly expecting some sweet tribute to his wonderfulness. I took the microphone and looked around the room at all the faces, his mother, his boss, his friends, everyone whose respect and admiration Paul valued most. Thank you all for being here tonight. I began, my voice steady and clear. Paul wanted everyone important to him to be here to celebrate, and I think that's perfect. Because tonight, I want to share with all of you exactly how much Paul really means to me. The crowd smiled expectantly. Paul stood nearby, beaming with anticipation. I clicked the remote control in my hand and the screen lit up. But instead of baby photos or graduation pictures, the first image was a screenshot of Paul's text messages. Honestly, you're draining. Give me a break. Also, don't wait up tonight. I'm with someone who actually excites me. The room fell silent. I heard someone gasp. Paul's smile faltered as he realized what he was seeing. These are the messages Paul sent me while you all thought he was at work. I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. I clicked to the next slide, and more screenshots appeared. Messages to Amanda, photos with Rachel, flirty conversations with Jessica. My girlfriend is so clingy and boring. I need someone exciting like you. Don't worry about her. She's just a temporary situation I'm dealing with. I'm stuck with someone who doesn't understand me, but I'm working on getting out. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear people's shocked breathing, the clink of someone setting down a glass with shaking hands. Paul's face went from confusion to horror to rage in the span of seconds. Turn it off, he hissed at me, but his voice was drowned out by the murmurs starting to ripple through the crowd. I clicked to the next slide. Credit card statements showing hotel charges, expensive dinners, jewelry purchases, all on dates when he'd told me he was working late. These are receipts showing how Paul spent our shared money on other women while making me feel guilty for asking for basic honesty, I announced. Paul's mother had gone completely pale. His boss was staring at the screen with disgust. His co-workers were whispering to each other, and I could hear fragments like, "Can you believe this?" and "What a creep." I clicked again. Photos of Paul with different women at restaurants, clearly on dates, all time-stamped within the past few months. The room erupted in shocked conversations. Paul's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, in front of everyone whose opinion mattered to him most. The reactions were immediate and devastating. Paul's mother covered her mouth with her hand, staring at the screen in horror. "Paul, what is this?" she whispered. His boss shook his head in disgust. "This is not the kind of character we expect from our employees," he said loud enough for nearby people to hear. Paul's college friends were exchanging looks of disbelief. One of them, Marcus, stepped forward. "Dude, what the hell? You said you and she were happy." Women in the crowd were looking at Paul with complete revulsion. His neighbor's wife actually took a step backward, as if his behavior might be contagious. But the most satisfying reaction came from Paul's coworker Amanda. Yes, the same Amanda he'd been cheating with. She was at the party because Paul had insisted on inviting everyone from work. She stared at the screen, then at Paul, then back at the screen. Her face went through confusion, realization, and then pure fury. "You told me you were single," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You said you lived alone." The crowd turned to stare at her, then back at Paul. The pieces were falling into place for everyone. Paul stood in the middle of it all, trapped by his own lies, watching his reputation collapse in front of everyone who'd ever respected him. His face was red with rage and humiliation, but there was nowhere for him to hide. Paul finally snapped. He lunged toward me, his face twisted with fury. "How dare you do this to me?" he shouted, reaching for the remote control. "Turn it off right now." But James and two other men stepped between us, blocking Paul's path to me. "Back off, man," James said firmly. "You've got bigger problems than the remote control." Paul looked around the room wildly, seeing disgust and disappointment on every face that had moments before been celebrating him. "This is all fake," he shouted desperately. "She's crazy. She made all this up because she's obsessed with me." But everyone had seen the screenshots, the photos, the credit card statements. There was no explaining away that level of evidence. His mother was crying now, her hand pressed to her chest. "Paul, how could you treat her like this? How could you treat anyone like this?" His boss was already moving toward the door. We'll be discussing this situation on Monday morning, he said coldly before leaving. Paul's perfectly planned birthday party had become his public execution. Every lie he'd ever told was exposed. Every cruel thing he'd done was on display for everyone who'd ever looked up to him. He stood in the middle of the room, alone despite being surrounded by people, watching his entire social world reject him in real time. It was beautiful. I turned off the projector and picked up the microphone one last time. The room fell silent again, everyone waiting to see what I would say next. I looked directly at Paul, then let my gaze sweep over everyone who had witnessed his downfall. Paul told me I was draining, I said, my voice steady and strong. He said I was needy and boring, and that other women were more exciting than me. I paused and smiled, feeling more powerful than I'd ever felt in my life. Well, Paul, if I'm so draining, then I'll stop giving you my love, my time, my energy, and my home. I reached into my purse and pulled out his house key, the key to the apartment we'd shared for over a year, the key that represented all the lies he'd built our relationship on. I tossed it onto the coffee table with a satisfying clink. Happy birthday, Paul. I hope it was everything you wanted. The room was dead silent except for the sound of Paul's heavy breathing and his mother's quiet sobbing. I set the microphone down on the table next to the key and walked toward the front door. As I passed through the crowd, people stepped aside to let me through. Some nodded at me with respect. Others whispered things like, "Good for you," and "You deserve better." I had never felt more vindicated in my life. I walked out of that house with my head held high, leaving behind the wreckage of Paul's reputation and the shocked silence of his guests. Behind me, I could hear the party dissolving into chaos. Voices raised in argument, doors slamming as people left early, Paul shouting desperately at anyone who would listen. But I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove away from the house where I'd wasted 2 years of my life on a man who never deserved me. The night air felt cool and clean through my open windows. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Paul had spent months making me feel small, unworthy, draining. Tonight, I'd shown everyone, including myself, exactly who was really in control. The humiliation wasn't mine to carry anymore. It was his, and he'd earned every bit of it. As I walked home from that coffee meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. Paul's world had collapsed after the party. He'd been fired from his job, lost most of his friends, and was facing social exile that would follow him for years. His mother barely spoke to him, ashamed of who her golden boy had turned out to be. Meanwhile, I was thriving. New apartment, new confidence, new respect for myself, and what I deserved from the people in my life. I'd learned that sometimes being called draining by the wrong person is actually a compliment. It means you asked for basic respect and honesty from someone who is incapable of providing either. Paul thought he was teaching me a lesson about being too needy. Instead, he taught me that I was worth so much more than I'd been settling for. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even. Sometimes it's becoming the person who would never tolerate that treatment in the first place. And that's exactly who I became. If this story of turning betrayal into triumph inspired you, make sure to subscribe and share it with anyone who's ever been called too much by someone who is actually too little. Sometimes the people who call us draining are the ones who've been draining us all along, and the sweetest revenge is simply refusing to let them anymore. Thanks for watching.